Okay, last thing we're going to look at is anatomy of the ear. And then I'm also going to do physiology. I should just put ear anatomy and physiology. Really, we're going to look at the pathway of sound through this. So we saw that the eye was a photoreceptor, right? We saw smell and taste were chemoreceptors. And then now we're looking at the ear, which is going to use mechanoreceptors, which are actually going to register like physical movement and so it's going to translate a sound wave into physical movement. Technically, a sound wave is the movement of atoms in the air anyway, which is a type of movement. Oh, that's a bad place for my image. Let me put that right there. Put my video right there. So we're going to look at the different parts of the ear. So the external part of the ear, or the outer ear. The outer ear is going to be composed of a couple things. One here is the external acoustic meatus. And then the other thing we have is the tympanic membrane. Right? The tympanic membrane is what you guys commonly know as the eardrum. So essentially, this is how a sound wave is going to work. Maybe I shouldn't make it in blue, but it's fine. Let's just imagine air. Okay, we're going to have sound wave that's going to come into the external acoustic meatus or auditory meatus or canal. It's all kind of the same thing. And it's going to hit the tympanic membrane. So the middle part of the ear is this part, which is lodged kind of between and within the temporal bone. It's within the cavity in the temporal bone. So this is our middle ear. And the middle part of the ear is made of ossicles, which are the three smallest bones of the body. So let's do like 4, 5, and 6 like that, just because you can see how the pathway of sound is going to be. So 4 is the malleus. The malleus is going to vibrate, and that causes the vibration of the incus. And then we're going to have number 6, which is the vibration of the stapes. The stapes is going to sit right here in a part called the oval window, which is basically right behind this organ, which is actually part of the inner ear, which is inside of the temporal bone. Okay. This is the vestibular cochlear device. So you have the vestibules and semicircular canals, which is doing balance. So like this part is the vestibule. And these are the semicircular canals. And that does balance. But for your lecture, I didn't really get through it. So I don't have time to go over it now. I mean, I have time because it's a video, but since we didn't cover it in lecture, I don't expect you to know it. You want to know this spiral portion. The spiral portion is the cochlea. So the cochlea is what's doing sound. Okay. The cochlea is partially made of bone, and then it has membranes that are full of fluids as well as mechanoreceptors. Part of the middle ear, I'll just say because I talked about this in class, is this tube right here. This is the pharyngeotympanic tube. So the pharyngeotympanic tube is the last remaining pharyngeal slit. Actually, it's the only remaining pharyngeal slit that goes from the inside of the throat to the outside, because we aren't fish that have like cut open pharyngeal slits, which are going to be where their gills are. The pharyngeotympanic membrane is basically to equalize or equivalent to make air pressure equal between the external auditory meatus and the throat area. It's also where earwax travels down. Like if you can't get out this way, it actually travels down that way. So you don't really have to clean out your ears. It'll just go down your throat. Yum, right? Actually, that's why they tell you be careful about cleaning out your ear because you can pop your eardrum. When you pop that eardrum, basically the sound vibration will hit the malleus directly instead, and it kind of creates this like weird ear tunnel sort of effect as you hear things. It's almost like you always hear a whooshing sound because you can't stop all the sound from coming into vibrate your malleus. Okay, let's look at the cochlea. Okay, so the cochlea, when we cut the cochlea open, what we're going to see is the cochlea is going to look like this. It has 3 different ducts. What are all those ducts is a little less important. You want to know this middle duct, and this is the cochlear duct. The cochlear duct is going to have like where this white square is going to have the spiral organ. Also called the organ of Corti. And that's what this is down here. Essentially, this top part, which kind of went away a little bit, this is the tectoral membrane, so that top part. And then you have all of these different hair receptors or hair cells that have cilia. This is one including. So those are the actual mechanoreceptors. Then you have some support cells, and then this layer down here is the basilar membrane. Okay. So you want to think about this as what's going to happen. So sound waves are going to come in from the external auditory or acoustic meatus, hit the tympanic membrane, it hits the malleus or vibrates the malleus, vibrates the incus, vibrates the stapes. And then back behind the stapes is actually going to be one of these fluid-filled tubes here. So this fluid-filled tube, actually it's this one, which is the tympanic, it's called the tympanic duct. The tympanic duct, which you guys don't need to know, it vibrates the basilar membrane. So as the basilar membrane vibrates, like moves up and down, essentially as it moves up, these hair cells hit the tectoral membrane. And that means these hair cells come in contact with the tectoral membrane. And that's going to change the shape of this cell because this is our receptor. Right? Just like we had a photoreceptor that understood what light was, and then that presence of light triggered the action potential. In this case, the presence of sound is going to change the receptor's shape, and that's going to trigger an action potential that's attached to these receptors, and that is what makes up CN8, the vestibular cochlear nerve. And then this message, remember, goes to the thalamus, and then it goes to the temporal lobe, right? So technically, like, okay, so technically how sound is how sound is converted into a wave of vibrational energy, and then how the receptors change here is much more complicated. But we're gonna make it a little bit more simplified, and I just want you to understand like what is the pathway of sound in order to be registered by the temporal lobe. Okay, you should know that order. You should understand, basilar membrane has to shift upwards. So those hair cells move against the tectoral plate, and as they move against the tectoral plate, that changes their shape, which causes the action potential to go down cranial nerve number 7, and then cranial nerve number 8, which is basically going to cause it to be registered in the temporal lobe. Okay. So this is our last video. So we should see how taste and smell are using chemoreceptors just in slightly different ways. Make sure you understand how they're different. We looked at the eye, its anatomy, which is not as complicated as I thought it was, but it probably is a little more complicated for you guys. And then we looked at how light enters the eye in order to stimulate a photoreceptor. Now, photoreceptor stimulation is really, really complicated. I can tell you that. What I told you guys is probably the simplest part of photoreceptors and how they work. And then just now we finished up with the ear, labeling all the parts of the ear and understanding how sound travels through the ear in order to basically project sound towards the brain.